Well, I'm tearing my technology apart here. Technology is a wonderful thing until the moment it's not. I see a lot of my friends, or a lot of people who I call friend, in the audience today, and I just want to ask, do I owe any of you money? If I do, I knew somebody would do that. If I do, your check's in the mail. Okay. Yeah, really, yeah. Okay, let me get undiscombobulated here, and I'll get rocking and rolling. Are y'all just going to stand, or are you going to sit, or what? Golly. Okay. When soldiers fight away from home, they leave behind all the non-combatants. I hope they leave behind the non-combatants, mothers, fathers, siblings, friends, and some friends are young women with whom the soldier boys, and don't forget they are exactly that, boys, had grown up with. In World War I, many of these guys were away from home for the first time. They lived under duress in hastily constructed training camps, most of which were awful, and then later they lived in even worse trenches. They were often subject to combat regimens of long periods of boredom, broken only by short bursts of terror, as the saying goes. Consequently, they longed for those who kept the home fires burning. And in this era of correspondence, they kept in touch by writing letters, thank goodness, because then we can keep track of them. My presentation today concerns one young woman that soldiers corresponded with, and that correspondence was not only about them, but about her. Irene Pierce, who I hope you can see here, lived in Tallassee, near Montgomery, and approximately 250 young men from there, both black and white, served in the armed forces during World War I. This was a significant portion of Tallassee's total population that in 1910 was like 1,347 people, and in 1920 the census caught 2,000 people. So somewhere between 1,350 and 2,000 people lived in Tallassee in 1917, 1917-18, when 250 of these soldiers were taken into the armed forces. It's probably fair to say that almost every one of Irene Pierce's friends growing up, male friends growing up, was gone at some point during this period of time. Ms. Pierce retained a collection of soldiers' mail and a photograph album, mostly of portraits. Her correspondence has 19 postcards that she received from soldiers and 11 letters, 10 of which came from 2 soldiers that are the core of my discussion today. Let me talk a little bit about this collection, the Irene and J.R. Godwin, and I know that I'm telegraphing some of the information here. The Irene and J.R. Godwin collection, which is record group 90 at the Wiregrass Archives. And for any records managers in the audience, plug up your ears when I say record groups. For those of you not in the battles between records managers and archivists, the records managers hate it when archivists call their manuscript collections records group. It just makes them crazy, which is why I do it. I received this collection as a result of a 2008 conference about Alabama in World War I held here at ADAH. Danny Phillips, man from Tallassee, who was Irene and JR's grandson, allowed the Wiregrass Archives, which is my facility, to scan his collection of postcards and photographs and letters that really were saved by his grandmother and passed along to him. My particular interest today are in the letters that came from those 2 soldiers, a guy named Chester Shrum and another fellow named J.R. Godwin. Now, archival collections don't stand alone. They don't stand by themselves. They fit into the context of their times, and they connect with their past and with their futures. I was lucky that parts of this collection gave hints that led me to sources like regimental histories and wartime activity reports of groups like the Red Cross that allowed me to make those connections. And it's really from those connections that we learn more about what this collection actually is saying to us as researchers. In large part because, and when we're talking about Irene, and I really want to talk about Irene, but I'm limited in how much I can talk about Irene because there's scant information about her. And if you've done any genealogical work, you know how that business goes, or if you've looked into the history of a particular individual, you know how difficult it sometimes is if they didn't leave an archival collection of their own to get at who they were. And as I tell my students and as I argue at conferences, because that's what conferences are about, that even people who are literate don't necessarily operate completely within a literate culture. They don't pass information along via written records. They might get captured by other people's written records, but they don't necessarily write a lot of records of their own. And frequently, unless they're exceptionally literate, living in the literate culture that an academic, for example, lives in, then they don't necessarily produce written records that other people save either. And that's really what's happened with Irene here. So we look at her not only through the prism of the context of World War I and what little we know about her in World War I, but we're going to look at some of her through what these letters written to her imply and hint at. So some other information came not only from those things like regimental histories that talk about J.R. and Chester Shrum and other people that she was writing to, but also from the Phillips family, from Danny Phillips' extended family. He was kind enough to answer many questions that I asked him. He wrote me 2 separate emails saying, I'll answer your first 8 questions, but I'm really tired. I can't answer the other 4 because I've just had heart surgery, but here we go. And it's like, great, man, thanks. From taking time out from recuperating from heart surgery, you could have waited. And then he gave me some genealogical reports from his aunt, and they are what they are. For example, they've got J.R. Godwin in the completely wrong regiment. So you have to take some of this stuff with a grain of salt, I guess. I was also lucky to secure the service record of J.R. Godwin, which was singed but not burned to pieces in the 1973 fire at the Military Records Unit of the National Archives in St. Louis. That consumed all of the records, except for a lot of Alabama records, of all soldiers from the Spanish-American War through World War I into World War II. So a huge loss in 1973. Now, let me also plug one other great local resource, and that's the service cards that staff at the Alabama Department of Archives and History in the 1920s put together to document every Alabama serviceman. And sometimes there are duplicate cards, but man, what a great resource this is. Currently, ADAH is running a project to digitize these cards and asks for your help in capturing the information off of them. And there are a few archivists on staff here today that can help you get started with that. Now, I sent some incorrect information out to the people who were putting together the PR for this, and I got something in the mail yesterday that said, come here, Marty Olliff, talk about this girl that was 17 years old. Well, she wasn't 17 years old. She was 22 years old, which probably isn't that much of a difference for her. From 1907, Irene Pierce, from 1907 to 1922, when she first started having babies, she worked in the Tallassee mill, the cotton mill, and she was a spooler at the cotton mill. Now, she started in 1907 because that's when she finished 8th grade. which was the highest grade offered in Tallassee. And she stopped in 1922, maybe 1923, after she had her first of 7 children. Let me give you this is the mill a drawing of the mill she actually worked in. This was refurbished in 1913, I want to say. Now, she also did her part for the war effort through local Red Cross work, doing things like rolling bandages and making comfort kits. And even though this is a picture from Massachusetts, you can get an idea of how people from town just did work parties of rolling bandages. Let me put this into a little bit of context. In May of 1917, a month after the U.S. entered World War I, the Red Cross had 562 chapters spread across the face of the United States. By March of 1919, that had grown to 3,724 chapters. So a little bit of expansion. In addition, in December of 1918, Alabama did a census of their Red Cross workers and had 133,500 Red Cross members who helped throughout the nation make a total of 371 million articles of relief, gowns, hospital gowns, furniture for hospitals, rolling bandages, things like that, discrete items that could be counted. 371 million. This was worth millions of dollars in more or less free labor given to the war effort. And Irene helped with that. Irene also participated in the American version of what was called, and I'm going to butcher the French here, the Marine de Guerre, a huge network of pen pals originally created for French soldiers in October of 1914. This program expanded in 1917 after the Belgian consulates in the United States called for American women to write to soldiers at the front. They just said, any soldier, just start writing to soldiers. And as we'll see from Irene's correspondence, this business of being a pen pal spread to soldiers in American training camps who were away from home, again, many for the first time. Of course, Irene corresponded with Tallassee boys who left for the war in 1918, like her future brother-in-law, Loman Ballard. I have a bunch of pictures of these people. I don't know who they are. So none of them are identified except for these 2 guys that you're seeing here. Her brother, she corresponded with, Willie Pierce, and her future husband, John Godwin. A number of these guys went into the 81st Division, called the Wildcat Division, which provided the title for this particular talk. But before they left, she became pen pals with soldiers she never met. One of these fellows was Chester Shrum, who became obviously enamored of Irene Pierce. Excuse me, I got to check my time and my phone keeps going off. Okay, I can bore you for another 26 minutes. Irene kept 5 letters from this guy, Chester Shrum. He was a Pennsylvanian in Company I of the 328th Regiment of the 82nd Division, training at Camp Gordon near Atlanta. This was the same regiment as Sergeant Alvin York, who was in Company G of the 328th. 3 of the letters show a rising familiarity and comfort with his pen pal, Irene Pierce. The first 2 are fairly formal. As you can see from the one on the left, one in the center here, he begins, "My dear Ms. Pierce." And then he lets us know that Irene Pierce first contacted him with a postcard. There is another postcard written to a soldier that I can't identify that begins from her to him, "My dearest friend," which may have been why Chester started getting a little enamored of Irene. It notes how much he and his comrades value support from civilians at the home front, and he kind of goes on a little bit about that. The second letter, which you see in the middle, tells us a bit more about Irene. She was bellicose. Shrum refers to her second contact, which was a letter to him. And he quotes, or I quote, "And so you would like to have a whole handful of the Kaiser's heart, would you? I'm surprised at one little maid," unquote. But by that second letter, he was on that mission to court her. So he shared her anonymity to the Kaiser, writing, "I want to get a hold of that mustache of his. Then we'll find out for sure if he has a heart." As the wearer of facial hair, I would like to say I'm a tad offended by this idea of pulling on someone's mustache so hard that you find out if they have a heart or not. Chester also speaks about exchanging photographs, and then his third letter is very bold. He addresses Irene as "my dear friend," which is a lot more familiar, and he tells her he considers her one of the best friends he's ever had, and pushes to meet her. Shrum pledges to send her his photograph. After he had a second set made, he never got the first set of photographs. So we don't know if that photograph ever came to her or not. We can't identify Chester Shrum. He closes this letter by signing only his first name, not his entire name as he did in the previous two letters. And he states in this PS, "I'll make these mistakes a hug even if I can't give them now." He obviously wanted this relationship to bloom. But how did Irene feel? It's probably telling that she didn't hear, or he didn't hear from her again. We're not absolutely sure. 7 weeks later, he wrote this letter, opening with a formal "Dear Miss Pierce," then plaintively asking her if he had offended her. He ends, "By losing your correspondence," I think he meant "but," "seems more like losing the friendship of some old companion. So if there's any way in which to win back your good graces, I would be very glad to hear of them. Trusting that you will reply," and then closing with his initials and his last name, substantially more formal in this case. And from this fragmentary correspondence, we don't know if Irene ever wrote to Chester again, but I really kind of think she did not write to him again. And that third letter was really a piece of work. Chester went on to earn his corporal stripes, which was a pretty good deal, and he was captured at the front in October of 1918, remained a POW until the armistice about a month or 6 weeks later. He returned to Camp Merritt in May of 1919, as you can see here, and he sent Irene this one last postcard announcing his arrival. He arrived on this ship, the USS Scranton, which was only the USS Scranton for about a year, maybe a little bit more. It was a converted merchantman. She kept that postcard, but she had another soldier in mind. That soldier was J.R. Godwin, whom she married in 1920. He was 3 years older than she was, and he avoided going to the mill when he too finished 8th grade by working his way down to New Orleans from Tallassee, then hopping a freighter to China. Some people will do anything to get out of certain kinds of work. Yeah, it's a joke. You can laugh. It's okay. Family lore holds that he was a radio operator on that ship and that he had taught himself Morse code, but his service record indicates that he had 7 years' experience as a telephone lineman, which was an unskilled labor or semi-skilled labor at the time, but it was kind of on the cusp of a new technology, stringing lines. One of these things served him well when he was drafted in May of 1918. So instead of entering a rifle company like all of the other guys from Tallassee who were drafted on that same day, Godwin found himself in the 306th Field Signal Battalion of the 81st Division, training at Camp Sevier in South Carolina. In late July, Godwin and the 81st shipped up to Camp Mills to depart for Liverpool, and then they were deployed from there. And let me take a second to talk about this this postcard. This was sent to Renee or to Irene Rennie from Lowman Ballard, and it's torn up, it's badly beaten up, but it's their self-regard. You can see the Wildcat is attacking the kind of beaten up German, and Ballard wrote on the back that he was her comrade, spelling it in the German way, and all these kind of little humorous things that go on. So anyway, so J.R. Godwin, in August, after arriving in Liverpool and then marching down to Southampton, sailed to Cherbourg and was stationed at Tonnerre from August 23rd to September 14th, 1918. He sent his first letter to Irene that's still in this collection on September 8th, 1918, just before his unit marched up to the line at Saint-Dié. He complains about not receiving any mail for 40 days, but takes comfort in the fact that nobody else got any mail for 40 days either. Irene wrote him on that same day, September 8th, but her letter didn't catch up to him for a full month. It arrived with one that she had mailed on July 14th. September 8th and July 14th arrived on the same day, so that was nice. Godwin replied to both of them at once, thanking her for her services, which she obviously had described and had called small. Those things like writing letters and rolling bandages and working for the Liberty Loans and things like that. We learn from Godwin that Irene Pierce, quote, spoke of wanting to come to France as a nurse, unquote, which was kind of a wartime fantasy, I suppose, shared by many who had wanted to hold the heart of the Kaiser in their hand. That next week, Godwin and the 81st moved up to the Verdun sector and fought in the Battle of Meuse-Argonne, suffering almost all of its 970 casualties in the last 2 days of the war. Immediately after the armistice, they marched to Moussy-sur-Seine, which is back near Tonnerre, and then the unit stayed there until May 1st, 1919. All of Godwin's remaining correspondence came between January 28th and March 18th, 1919. He still had little mail, and he complained about that because he was signal corpsman. He also had nothing to do except, as he wrote, stand 3 calls a day, which were all mess calls. He longed to get home, and he had not seen any of the friends that he had gone to war with since seeing Irene's brother the previous December 1918. He assured Irene that her brother Willie was in good health after the fighting was finished. Interestingly enough, during that gap of his letters from September until January, Willie is writing kind of constantly. Pretty much all of his correspondence, which are postcards, are coming in December of 1918, and there's 4 or 5 of those. There's not much to them. I'm not dead yet, basically, is what he's saying. My parents one time, I hadn't written them in probably 6 months, and so they sent me a postcard, and I was to return it to them, and it had little check boxes, and that was the first one, I'm not dead. And the second was, please send money. So they knew they'd get a response. We know from Godwin's letter something a little more about Irene and her family. They wanted to get Willie back home. We're not exactly sure why, but it sounds like the health of their father was of real concern. Godwin advised them about strategies for doing this, for getting Willie back home. But he ended 2 of his letters where he addressed this same thing. He ended 2 of his letters with a discouraging note that many had tried this route, but very few had succeeded. It was pretty tortuous. You had to go around in all these circles and write to a whole bunch of different people, and then they had to approve. It's Army bureaucracy. So after the correspondence ends, Godwin went on to catch the flu. In April of 1919, he was hospitalized for 5 days, and his service records tell us that he was given aspirin for the flu and bed rest in a crummy hospital. But he recovered enough to march to Saint-Nazaire and then to return home. Now, he returned on the USS Roanoke, another converted merchantman, back to Charleston, South Carolina, where he arrived on June 22nd, 1919. And Irene, as you can see, kept his boarding pass. This is a picture of the Roanoke in New York on one of its 3 trips, bringing troops back home in 1919. And I like this particular picture because you can see the soldiers standing on the deck as the ship is being piloted in to the pier. Godwin was discharged at Camp Gordon, Georgia, where Chester Shrum had trained at the end of June of 1919. Now, it's difficult to tell if Godwin and Pierce were courting before he left, or if their wartime correspondence initiated a romance. Regardless, they married in 1920, and Irene left the mill upon the birth of her first of 7 children. Though Godwin had fled as far as China to avoid textile mill work but then after the war, he too worked a full career in the mill. He also took on odd jobs, and late in life moved furniture on weekends to supplement his income. So I suppose the mill, church, community, family, the little town of Tallassee, earning enough money to make ends meet, filled the lives of the Godwins after World War I. John Godwin lived until 1960. Irene lived until 1971. Chester Shrum had died in 1954 and is buried in his family plot in Tars, Pennsylvania. So finding out about the life of this girl the Wildcats left behind is more difficult than finding out about the Wildcats themselves. We can get a glimpse of her life, though, not only through records like the census, but also by reading between the lines of the letters that she treasured enough to keep from the war. So let me check my time again and see how many of these next slides I can show you. Oh yeah, I got a little bit of time. So since we have a few minutes, I'd like to show some of the images from this collection, all of which is online at troy.edu, Wiregrass Archives, inventories, 090.html. But get that quick, because I just found out that Troy is going to be changing a lot of our upper level domains, our top level domains, and so I'm going to be changing bunches of records as we move along. Here's one of the most interesting. There are 2 of these, and I'll show you one. This is an embroidered postcard. A kiss from France, and it comes from J.R. Godwin to Irene. And he writes, "Hello, no mail from you in some time. Hope to hear from you soon. We hear lots of stuff as we might get back soon. Don't know if it's true or not, hoping it is. We'll write you a letter soon. You do likewise. As ever, your friend, J.R. Godwin." This is not postmarked. I suspect he may have put this inside of a letter that he sent to her. It's also not censored. There's no indication that a military censor has looked at this thing, though all of the letters are censored. They're not redacted, but they have been passed through a censor. There's another one of these embroidered postcards, and honestly, it was all I could do to give them back to Mr. Phillips. I really wanted to pretend I'd lost them so I could hang on to them. And the other one is pretty cool. It doesn't show well on the screen. It's got a nice embroidered front, and it's actually got a flap on the front. And in the flap is a small card, a picture of a collie dog. And that's it. You know, it's just this little Easter egg, as the kids would say about their about video games today. It's just a little hidden thing, and it's really a pretty and nice thing. Postcards were a huge deal in 1917. In 1903, and I'm working from memory here, so don't hold me to this. This won't be on the test. In I think 1903, 1 billion postcards were sent around the world. In 1914, 7 billion postcards were sent in the United States alone. It was the email or the tweets of their day. Now, let me show you some pictures of soldiers here. I particularly like, these are all from the 39-leaf photo album, which have one picture per leaf on them. Although this first one over here to your left, my right, also appears as a postcard, because that was one of the things that you could do with photographs, was get them, go down to the local drugstore and then get your film produced, and it would be printed sometimes, if you wanted it done this way, on a very thin sheet of gossamer-like paper and pasted to a pasteboard back that was the size of a postcard. That was big business for drugstores during this era. So this picture shows up in 2 different places in the collection. Nobody's identified, even the guy who is definitely marked with the X's on his shoulders. I also like the photograph on the far side over there, on y'all's right, which I think might have been made after the war. If you look closely at his upper left sleeve, you can see the Wildcat insignia, so he was a member of the 81st, which narrows down who he might have been. He's one of 4 or 5 people, and again, I haven't tracked him down completely yet. He has a war service chevron on his sleeve down low, designating 6 months of service. A single chevron was for 6 months. 2 chevrons, which you'll see in J.R. Godwin's photograph, indicate you've been there a year. They were given out every 6 months. If this is if this is gold, and it's hard to tell the color because the other one is light blue. If this is gold, it's overseas service for 6 months. If it's light blue, it's stateside service for 6 months. I like the way he's posed as well. This is probably either in Tampa, Florida, or it's over in Tallassee, one or the other. I think it's in Tampa. A few of these other photographs come from Tampa. This is a snapshot, not a formal photograph, so there's not a photographer's name on this thing. There's at least one other of these that has an embossing on the photograph itself from a Tampa photographer. So it's a little hard to tell where this comes from. There's another one of another soldier in that same pose in that exact same spot. So I'd love to know what's going on there, but that's only because I'm nosy. Let's see, and then the guy in the center here, he's a pretty interesting photograph, not only because of the awful haircut, but it looks normal until you start looking at his ears. And look how far back the front of his head is just shaved basically to behind his ears. But strange things happen. Look at his unit insignia. It's the 6th Division insignia. And from what I could find out, the official insignia did not have the number 6 on it. There were some of these that were made with the number 6. People embroidered their own, or they had them embroidered or something like that. But this was not supposed to have been given out. So he probably had this insignia created for himself and added it on. And I'm not sure exactly why or when this would have occurred. Let me show you this last slide of some people who are civilians. And these were done, I'm not sure of the dates of this photographic album that these came out of, so I can't tell if these were wartime or not. I suspect they were, in large part because of the clothing here. These fellows in the one on this side are just, they're camping it up. 2 of them have pistols in this, and the third guy has a knife that he's holding. So I don't know exactly what's going on here, and I'm not sure if I want to know exactly what's going on here. but I find their clothing particularly fascinating in this. I love this sweet picture in the center, and I have some speculation about it that I'll share with you in just a minute after we look at the picture on the far side. The man in the bowler hat, who has what can only be described as a weak chin. I'm not one to talk, that's why I grew a beard. He shows up in 2 or 3 other photographs in military uniform. I think that's Loman Ballard. Is that Loman Ballard? Wonderful, wonderful. Let's talk after this is over. And so let me, and I'm happy to be shot down here, but if that's Loman Ballard, is that Irene's sister?
I don't know, but I do have some other pictures of Loman.
Okay. So if that is Irene's sister, as I looked at this photograph, this middle photograph, really hard in order to determine which photographs I wanted to put in this presentation, and when I made the photograph a little bit bigger, I played with it for quite a while to take a look at it. If that's her sister, whose name I think might have been Susie, I think I think this young lady is her, the sister, and I think this is Irene. But I'm not absolutely positive. Do you want me to stand over here again? Okay. So anyway, this is online. It's available for research. These photographs can be downloaded in low density pictures so that you could use them for something like this. And I encourage you to rob me. Just feel free. If you make any money off of it, though, let me know so that I can wag my finger at you. And if you need higher density images, we'll need to get in touch with the family to make sure that it's okay to use them. But the postcards, we have the obverse and the reverse digitized. So if anybody really wants to get into this and look at this further, or if it would advance your own research, I certainly invite you to look at all of this material at the Wiregrass Archives, Record Group 090. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Thank you very much.